And so my name is Theresa Lanowitz, and I'm head of cybersecurity evangelism with AT&T Cybersecurity. And just a little bit about my background. Yes, I did play college rugby at the University of Pittsburgh, and it is an awesome sport. I played second row for 3 years, and then I played 8-man or lock for the 4th year. The other person who was in second row with me, she graduated, so I needed someone my exact size, so I went to lock, if you know anything about rugby. So after I played rugby, and prior to joining AT&T Cybersecurity, I was an industry analyst. So I worked for a company called Gartner, and I also worked for a boutique analyst firm called Vogue for a number of years. Prior to that, I was a product manager at Borland. I was product manager on C++. I was the original product manager on Borland JBuilder, the Java development environment. So not only do I love cybersecurity, I also love application development. And while I was at Gartner, I started writing about application security back in 2001, 2002. And I was on the application development team covering quality assurance. And the siloed security people came to me when I started writing about application security. And they said, hey, app developer, stay in your lane. We don't need you talking about application security. We have everything covered. So just a little bit of background there. I started my career as a software developer with McDonnell Douglas, the airplane company, and I held a top secret US Department of Defense security clearance there when I was working on the C-17. So that's just a little bit about me, a little bit about my background. But what we're here to talk about today is the AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report. So we all know this, right? The more democratized compute becomes, the more at risk we are. The more adversaries take a look at this and say, wow, it's pretty interesting. If we think back to the mainframe days, when the only people who could get access to that mainframe data center were the people who worked there, our biggest security risk was someone coming into the data center, kicking the cord out from the wall, spilling coffee on the keyboard. But the moment we democratized compute and went out into the departments with PCs connected via LANs, we started to see cyber adversaries. So we saw those hobbyist hackers, people who said, I'm going to leave a digital signature just to show you that I am smarter than you are. We then evolved into web applications, mobile applications, everything hosted on the cloud, so we lost control very quickly. And the cyber adversaries realized that as well. So they said, well, you know what? Now we can extract money from these people by committing DDoS attacks, by committing ransomware attacks. We can get our political points of view across by being hacktivists. Again, executing DDoS attacks, for example. And we can also, from a well-coordinated nation-state perspective, really say, you know what, we're going to hold you hostage for something. So those are those new types of cyber adversaries, if you will. And now we move to this idea of edge computing. We're really at the edge, if you will, or we're poised on the precipice of a new era of computing. This new era of computing is edge computing. So if you think about the edge, the applications in edge, are completely different. The network for edge is completely different. Those applications, for the most part, are headless, non-GUI applications. The network is completely different. It's all about that data. So the adversaries are having a really good time with this. And they're figuring out how to attack these edge-type applications. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to figure out where people were on that journey to the edge and how they were protecting those applications, that data, and those endpoints they were connecting to these new types of networks or connecting to the cloud. So this report, the AT&T Cybersecurity Insights Report, while it has AT&T in the name, in the title, it is a vendor-neutral report. It's forward-looking with actionable advice. And we use the industry analyst firm IDC to help us gather the data. So IDC goes out and does the field survey for us. They have a really great survey house, so they'll create the questions so that we're not leading the witness, for example. And we do a mix of quantitative analysis as well as qualitative analysis. The quantitative analysis we certainly get from the survey that we conduct, the field survey. And the qualitative analysis, we interview subject matter experts inside of AT&T as well as with the partner sponsors that we work with. So just a little bit about the demographics on this survey. We surveyed 1,520 professionals from around the world. So that includes North America, Latin America. In EMEA, it's UK, Ireland, France, and Germany. And in APAC, it's Australia, India, South Korea, and Singapore. And we wanted to talk to people who were cybersecurity professionals, application development professionals, also line of business people. And the reason we wanted to talk to the line of business is because the line of business, interestingly enough, we found out in our 2021 research, the line of business, they're the ones that are really driving this new way of computing. They're the ones that are saying, we want to bring in a 5G network so we can create edge use cases, edge experience. But they're also saying, we're not going to do this unless we are in lockstep with the cybersecurity team. And we also know that that cybersecurity team, because of the pandemic, that security team has moved from being this very technical group of people to being part of the business, to being a business enabler and a business imperative. So that's a little bit about the demographics. We also surveyed 6 industry verticals: finance, healthcare, retail, manufacturing, energy and utilities, and US public sector. So I mentioned we do a lot of qualitative analysis as well. These are the subject matter experts who helped us inform this report: AT&T, Akamai, Checkpoint, Cisco, Digital Defense, Fortinet, Juniper Networks, Palo Alto Networks, Redshield, SentinelOne, and VMware. So I've mentioned the word edge a couple of times. What does edge mean? We found out through our research that edge has different meanings to different people. If you ask 10 different people the definition of edge, you'll probably get 11 different answers. So there's a lot of confusion around how people are interpreting edge right now. So what we found out through our research is that there are 3 common characteristics that people really gravitate to for edge. The first is it's a distributed model of management, intelligence, and networks. So that distribution is key. The second characteristic is that the applications, the workloads, hosting, it's all closer to where that data is being created and consumed. Because as we move forward, data becomes the most important currency that we're concerned with. So everything is closer to where that data is being created and consumed. And the third characteristic is that the edge is software defined. And this can mean on-premises or in the cloud. So those are the 3 common characteristics. So if you're having this discussion in your own organizations about should we do edge, should we not do edge, get a clarification on what people mean. Use these characteristics, or don't, tell me I'm wrong with these characteristics, but have a level set of what you mean with edge, because everybody has a different meaning for it. So one of the things we found in our AT&T Cybersecurity Insights report for 2022, we took away 3 big findings. The first is that people are moving to the edge. 75% of the survey participants who took our survey, remember, N is 1,520, 75% of them said, yeah, we're moving to the edge. We are either in that ideation phase where we're researching it, we're in a proof of concept stage, or we're in full-scale rollout of an edge use case. So that was pretty encouraging. The second big aha that we took away from this is that it's still a 50-50 world out there. A lot of things on-premise still, a lot of things in the cloud. So if you listen to all the hype, you would think that everybody has moved full-scale 100% to the cloud. Our research found differently. There's still a hybrid world out there for a variety of reasons, and we go into that in more detail in the report. And the third big aha that we found is that as organizations move to the edge, as they start to bring in these edge use cases, they say, we need to figure out which cybersecurity controls we're going to take with us to the edge, or which legacy cybersecurity controls we're just going to use for these other things that we still have to support. So there's this idea of what cybersecurity controls are you going to use at the edge? And we have a lot of detail on that and what people thought. And one of the big ahas we took away from this is that 65% of our survey respondents said they're working with a third party on their journey to the edge. That means they're working with a consulting organization, managed security services, global systems integrator, some type of vendor. And so this is really important that people are saying, you know what, as we move to the edge, we're not going to do this do-it-yourself. What we're also finding, and this is what we're finding from the 2023 research that we're conducting right now, we're finding that those decades-old silos that have been erected, those decades-old silos are starting to erode. And starting is the key word there, but those silos that have been built up between network, application development, security, the line of business, those silos are starting to erode. And as you move to the edge, the stakes are too high, the outcomes are too critical, so you can't have those silos that have been erected over the past several decades really playing a factor. So as we go, we'll take each of these key findings one by one, and I'll share with you some data that we found. So edge momentum. As I said, 75% of the people who took our survey said they are moving to the edge. When we saw this, we thought, wow, this is really great. This is very encouraging. Because I think when people think of the edge, they think of self-driving cars. That's the first thing that comes to mind. And you'll see here in this data, self-driving cars did not even crack the top 10. So there's a movement to the edge. So what are people doing moving to the edge? We wanted to find out where people were with their use cases in production. Were they thinking about edge? Were they going off, doing some research, maybe talking to others who have been doing this? Or were they in a proof of concept mode where things did not have to scale? Or were they in full-scale production where they could roll things out? So the way we read this slide is that on the y-axis, we have the different verticals that we surveyed: finance, healthcare, energy and utilities, manufacturing, US public sector, and retail. On the x-axis, we have different color bars. So the gray is there, it's the low stage. They're out there researching, ideating, maybe reading some white papers, maybe kind of doing some experimentation, but it's the ideation phase, the low stage. The mid stage is proof of concept. Yeah, we've done our research, and we think we can do this. Let's try this with a small scale. Roll it out to a few people, nothing at scale. And the dark blue, which is the mature stage, we're in production with this right now. So if we take a look at this, for example, retail, the bottom line, 52% of organizations who identify as retail organizations taking the survey said that they are in the mature stage of production with edge use cases. So what are these use cases? The top 2 use cases that came back, they were tied for first place, 59% each. Retail, loss prevention, and manufacturing, video quality inspection on the manufacturing floor. The other top use cases that came back, for energy, it's remote monitoring. So remote monitoring of an offsite oil rig, for example. In finance, it was concierge services. So concierge services plus real-time fraud detection, they were very closely tied. So that's how finance is really using the edge and defining the edge. Healthcare. Everybody knows the healthcare use case. We've all probably had video appointments with our physicians at some point over the past couple of years. The pandemic accelerated what healthcare is doing in terms of edge. So the pandemic accelerated that use case of, I want to have a video conference call with my doctor. The other big thing that came up for us with healthcare were pop-up remote clinics, especially with the pandemic. The remote testing sites that had to be fully secure so that when you go in there, your sample is tested, they need to be able to identify you, they need to be able to get those samples back to the branch office, to the branch hospital if you prefer, but that needed to be secure as well. Manufacturing, video quality inspection on the assembly line. So being able to use cameras and sensors on an assembly line to say, I'm able to identify where a defect is being put into whatever it is I'm producing in near real time. I can then also say, well, I see that defect going in. I know how many widgets on my assembly line have been produced. I can go and I can get those widgets back. So that really helps with business outcomes in terms of recall efforts. It really helps to minimize retail, or it helps to minimize the recall efforts of something that may have been produced with a known defect that went in. In US public sector, the top use case was public safety. So for public safety, what they told us in US public sector is, and this was for state and local government and higher education, what they told us was they wanted to be able to use edge computing for identification of what was going on. Noises, for example. The example that we got back quite a bit, people said, well, if somebody calls and reports to their local police department that they heard what they thought was a gunshot, was it really a gunshot, or is it just noise from a loud party down the street? So they're trying to use edge for that type of use case. And then retail, loss prevention. So those are the types of use cases that people were using for the edge today. These are the types of use cases that are being deployed. And this shows us the use cases and the state of adoption and what use cases are out there. So it's no surprise that the top use cases are with industrial IoT, IoT types of devices, enterprise IoT functions, industry-oriented consumer IoT functions. But if you look all the way down, the very last thing I have on this chart, autonomous vehicles. 20% of our survey respondents said yes, we're thinking about using edge for autonomous vehicles. So that's a much, much lower rating or lower ranking than something like augmented reality or something like an IoT function. So there are a lot of edge use cases going on out there right now, and people are deploying to the edge. We wanted to find out what the perceived risk was of deploying to the edge. So each of our vertical industries that we surveyed came back and said, here's where we perceive the risk. What they told us was they believe that the likelihood of a risk, the likelihood of a cyber risk, the likelihood of a cyber compromise was highly likely. And they also said, if we do have a cyber incident, it's going to have a significant impact on the business. So if you think back 5, 10 years ago, the line of business and a cyber risk were completely disparate. One did not necessarily know what the other was doing. Now with the edge, because we have these very high stakes, people are saying if there is a cyber risk, it's going to impact the business. So this is, to me, this is really good news, because that again is starting to show that you have those erosion of those silos that have been built up, that security is now part of business. It has a full seat at the table, if you will, and really is part of being a business enabler and a business initiative. So this particular chart is a scatter chart, but we had to blow it up because you see that all of the 6 vertical industries that we surveyed are fairly close together there in terms of how they rank the likelihood of an attack and the impact to the business. So healthcare is the orange dot, and that's kind of it's down a little bit lower and to the left. And when we got this data back and we looked at this scatter plot, we said, why would healthcare be so much lower? So we did a little bit of analysis on this. So we said, you know, healthcare had to really pivot very quickly. They really had to modify their business models during the pandemic. Healthcare also, they were one of the earlier targets for things such as ransomware. So healthcare has largely learned how to take care of a lot of these issues a little bit sooner than some of the other industry verticals that we surveyed. So healthcare is a little bit lower there, but still, you know, everybody's saying that, yeah, we think the risk of an attack is highly likely, and we know that the impact to the business is going to be significant. So that's the big takeaway there, that the line of business is tying a cyber attack to business outcomes. So that's a big, big differentiator. Now, this particular table is my favorite piece of data from 2022. This is a heat map. And what we found out is that 74% of our survey respondents say a compromise, a security compromise, is very likely. So the way you read this heat map is on the y-axis, we have the different types of risks that people may be concerned about. So things such as ransomware, attack against endpoints, attacks against the workload at the cloud edge, attacks against the radio access network at the network edge. And across the top, on the x-axis, we have the different vertical markets that we surveyed. So the gray bar is the total. This is the overall aggregate of what people are concerned about. So ransomware, because of everything that has been happening with ransomware very conveniently cuts out the middleman. Everybody's concerned about ransomware. So overall, ransomware was number one with 66.1. So 66% of the survey respondents saying ransomware is a top concern. But if we take a look at this, and let's say we're a manufacturing organization. So we go over to the manufacturing column, and the darker the blue, the higher the percentage, the more concerned people are about the risk. So we go down the manufacturing column, and we see that 71.3%, or 71%, of manufacturing organizations who took this survey are most concerned about attacks against user and endpoint devices. So you look at that and you say, that kind of makes sense for manufacturing. They're really concerned about those endpoint devices. Likewise, if we look at healthcare, for example, they're only 60% concerned about endpoint attacks. You go down, healthcare, the biggest thing they're concerned about, 64%, attacks against the server and data within and at the network edge. So regardless of what, as long as you're in one of these 6 industries that we surveyed, you can use this table to start the discussion, to continue the discussion in your organization. So you can say, you know, I'm a healthcare organization or I'm a retail organization. Let's use this to figure out if we're concerned about the same thing as our peers are concerned about. And this is specifically written for the edge, but once I spend some time with this, you can probably look at this and say, this is true for any type of application, any type of concern inside of one of these 6 different industries that we surveyed. So this is to me, I'll give you the link to the report at the end of this presentation. This is on page 17 of the presentation. Spend a lot of time with this particular table. This to me is, like I said, the data of 2022. Because what this particular table really shows us is that there is this notion of shared responsibility. And I've heard it discussed here at the conference a couple of times. People saying, well, you know, your network provider doesn't provide all the security. Your cloud provider doesn't provide all of the security. And so back in our 2021 report, we spent a lot of time discussing this notion of the shared responsibility model. So if you are using a network from a network provider, doesn't matter who it is, there's some inherent security built into that network. But you as the user of that network, you have to then say, I need to protect my data, my applications, my endpoints. And the same thing, I don't have cloud up here, but the same thing holds true for cloud. You can use a public cloud. Name your favorite public cloud provider. You, as the customer of that public cloud, you have to protect your data, your applications, and your endpoints that are being connected to that public cloud. The cloud provider is not going to provide all the security for you. So this idea of a shared responsibility model is really critical when you're thinking about putting those applications out there, putting those new applications out there. What are you responsible for? What is your network provider responsible for? And what is your public cloud provider responsible for? So that's just a little bit about the movement to the edge and how people are moving and where they are moving to the edge. So the next big aha we took away from the report is that hybrid is a reality. We still have a lot of on-premise items as well as a lot of cloud items. So it's pretty much a 50-50 split. What this table shows us is that the types of networks that people are deploying with edge use cases. The biggest type is private 5G cellular, and I don't think that was any surprise to anybody when we reviewed this data. It's probably not a surprise to anybody when you're looking at this data. That's the biggest type of network that people are going to use. But this is really kind of surprising. This kind of gets into the whole SASE concept. SASE, the Secure Access Service Edge, which is SD-WAN, Zero Trust, CASB, Secure Web Gateway, and Firewall. Those 5 components make up SASE. So what we wanted to find out here is, what were you doing? What are these organizations doing with their security controls and their network functions? Are they combining them together, as SASE would suggest? Are they using them still separately? Do they have different network functions and different cybersecurity controls? So what this data shows us is that it's pretty much a 50-50 tie. The dark blue dots on the far right, so the combined cybersecurity and network functions in the cloud, such as SASE, that's 51.3%. So we'll call that 51%. The combined cybersecurity and network functions on-prem, 51.9%. So we'll call that 52%. So there's not much of a delta between them. So that makes the case that organizations are still some on-prem, some in the cloud. So again, you can take this back to your own organization and use it to determine where you are on your journey, or if you're kind of on the leading edge, so to speak. The third big takeaway we had was that organizations are moving to the edge, and they're trying to determine which cybersecurity controls should go along with them, or which ones should just remain with the legacy systems that they have to support. So this is a very, very dense chart, and what I would suggest is that you download the report and really take a long look at this. What we wanted to find out here was what the preferred cybersecurity controls were by network types. And we looked at 7 different network types. And as you can see here, things such as intrusion and threat detection, data leakage monitoring, and device authentication are the top controls, the top cybersecurity controls across all 7 of the network types. So those are the big cybersecurity controls that people are saying, yeah, we're going to take them with us as we move to the edge. So you can see the type of network they're using and the controls that they're using. This next slide, I don't want you to get confused and think they're the same. So these are the preferred cybersecurity controls by network types. This next slide are the preferred cybersecurity controls by components. The last slide, our y-axis, were the network types. This slide, our y-axis, are the different components. So things such as individual use devices, general purpose compute devices, and across the bottom are our network our network controls. So consistently, network access control and patching are cited as the least effective control that people are looking at. So this is interesting, and I want to come back to patching, because patching is one of those things that I think kind of gets a bad reputation, but it's interesting how people are perceiving it. So this slide really shows us the cybersecurity controls perceived as having the highest cost benefit. So to the left is negative, to the right is positive. So the highest cost benefit, people told us firewall at the network edge. They told us intrusion and threat detection, big cost benefit. But if you look down to the bottom 2, patching and DDoS. So we looked at this and we said, wow, this is kind of interesting. Why would those 2 be so low? If you think about DDoS, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. So people were saying, well, yeah, DDoS doesn't really help us that much until you need it to help you. So that's the rationale that we took away with why DDoS was ranked so low? Patching was ranked low because a lot of people, what they told us in the comments, they said, patching is something that is very manual. It's something that we do manually. It takes a lot of time, it's very reactive, and as we move to the edge, we want to be more proactive. We want things to be more automated. We don't want to have to deal with something being so slow. So since then, we've seen a lot of automated patching solutions coming out there, and a lot of people are pivoting and gravitating to these automated patching solutions. So this perception of patching was a very manual perception in this current piece of data. So those are the perceptions that people have of the cybersecurity controls that are going to have the most value to them as they move to the edge. So this slide talks about investment of cybersecurity. And people always want to know, how much are my peers spending on security? So the way we read this slide is the y-axis are our 6 different verticals: healthcare, finance, US public sector, retail, energy and utilities, and manufacturing. Across the x-axis, we have the different columns, or the different colors. The dark blue, the middle blue, and then the gray. So what we're seeing here is that the sweet spot for each of those 6 vertical markets that we surveyed is somewhere between 11 and 20%. So for example, if you are in finance, you go to the finance bar chart, the finance bar, 45% of the people who took our survey who say they are in financial services say that they are spending somewhere between 11 and 21% on security from their overall edge project budget. So this is very, very encouraging. As someone who has spent a long part of my career talking about why security needs to be budgeted for at the beginning of a project, this is very encouraging. So what they're saying is our overall edge budget, we are planning for security right up front, right out of the gate. Security is not an afterthought, and it's a hefty part of the budget. So for example, if you look through here, healthcare, 44% of healthcare organizations are spending somewhere between 11 and 20% of their overall edge project budget on security. Finance, 45% of them are spending somewhere between 11 and 20% of their overall edge project budget on security. US public sector, 55% of them are spending somewhere between 11 and 20% of their overall edge project budget on security. Retail, 51% are spending somewhere between 11 and 20% of their overall project budget on security. Energy and utilities, 55% of them are spending somewhere between 11 and 20% of their overall edge budget on security. And manufacturing, 50% of them are spending somewhere between 11 and 20% of their overall budget on security. So this is encouraging because it helps to, 1, break down those silos. 2, it says security is part of the entire ecosystem that we're building out. And our 2023 report, which will be coming out in January of 2023, we talk about the edge ecosystem, and we identify in there where people are spending their money. Are they spending their money on application development? Are they spending it on research? Are they spending it on networks? So that, I'll just tease a little bit of the data there. So it'll be pretty interesting data that will come out in January of 2023. So this is really nice because it does show that those silos are eroding and security has that full seat at the table, if you will. So what did we learn from this report? We learned that securing the edge is really a team effort. It may be a trope, it may be something that you say, oh, I've heard this a million times, but it really is about the people, the process, and the technology. Working with a trusted advisor versus going alone and trying to do everything yourself, because it becomes expensive and the stakes are very, very high. There's strong momentum for the edge. 75% of our survey participants are moving to the edge. And we see that movement happening continuously. Anecdotally, I have done 9 webcasts on this particular report this year. And the first question I ask is, where are you on your edge journey? Are you in ideation, proof of concept, or in full-scale production? Back in January, most people were in ideation, or they said, we don't even know. Now, the last one I did was in the beginning of September. Most people say we are proof of concept or full-scale production. So just in that short period of time, more and more organizations have said, we are moving to the edge. So figure out what you want your cybersecurity controls to be as you move forward. Which ones make sense from a cost perspective? Which ones make sense from what you are going to try to accomplish on the edge? And this is a big, big opportunity to collaborate. This is a big, big opportunity to tear down those silos that have been erected for the past 40, 50, 60 plus years inside of our IT organizations and really collaborate to deliver these strong business outcomes that organizations really are looking for. And so to get your copy of this report, just visit cybersecurity.att.com. You will have to give us an email for the core report. What we also did this year is that we took a look at all of the data that we get so much rich data back. So we took a look at all that interesting data that we gathered, and we said, you know, it would be really interesting to write some industry vertical reports based upon this data. So in 2022, we have also published, in addition to this core report on the left-hand side, we've also published these 4 vertical reports, one on healthcare, one on U.S. public sector, SLED, state, local government, and higher education, one on manufacturing, and one on energy and utilities. So please visit cybersecurity.att.com and download your reports today. So edge use cases in production. So finance, concierge services, and real-time fraud detection. The real-time fraud detection is the really interesting one. I think that a lot of credit card companies, for example, they have that attached to the credit card. What finance companies told us they wanted to do was they wanted to build real-time fraud detection into everything they were doing. So they were using edge networks for that. U.S. public sector, the public safety example that I gave, where they're trying to identify if somebody calls and said, hey, I heard a loud noise, wanting to make sure it's not a gunshot versus noise from a loud party. What they're doing is a lot of public sector organizations are using artificial intelligence to enrich a lot of that data that comes through. If you know anything about what's going on with 911, 911 is now going to sort of a video-based, audio-based type of reporting system. So somebody may be able to record that noise, and then when they call up the 911 operator, they can say, here's the noise that I heard, and there might be enough artificial intelligence in the system to say, that is just a loud noise, don't be concerned. Or it could be something else. So then they know the proper team to deploy. Manufacturing, visual quality inspection on the assembly line. A lot of the big manufacturers started doing this several years ago. Huge car manufacturer in Dearborn, Michigan. I happened to be able to visit that manufacturing facility once upon a time in a previous career. And if you watch them create these vehicles, these trucks that they're creating on this assembly line, it's a 3-dimensional assembly line. And before the vehicle gets on the assembly line, the doors, the tailgate, they are assigned to that particular vehicle. And as the vehicle moves through the assembly line, the doors, the tailgate, they're on an overhead track matching the body of the truck. And so let's say they're going along the assembly line, and all of a sudden they realize, oh, the door handle is off by 5 degrees. They can stop the production line right there and remediate that defect because of the cameras and the sensors that they're using on that assembly line. And what they can also do is they can go back and they can inspect and say, oh, the defect was introduced 3 vehicles ago. So let's bring these vehicles back on the assembly line and fix that defect. So before that, it was people were eyeballing the handle, for example, and saying, yeah, that looks pretty good. And then by the time you kind of get those trucks out there, maybe that handle determines that, oh, there needs to be a recall on that particular vehicle and so on. So that's the real-time visual inspection. The other big one that was ranked very highly was retail, so loss prevention. So again, in a physical brick and mortar environment, having cameras, sensors set up so you can understand what people are taking off the shelves, what are they walking out of the store with, what has actually been purchased, what has not been purchased. If you have ever been to Seattle or San Francisco, I don't have my badge on, but the lanyard sponsor, they have a really awesome store there, Amazon Go stores. And Amazon Go stores, you scan your barcode to get in, it's attached to a credit card, and you go in there and you can take anything you want off the shelves and you walk out with it. And when you go there, you sit outside and you watch people, and it looks, everybody comes out and they're happy. They look as though they are getting away with something. You know, so everybody is going in there and buying a bottle of water or a soda, a bag of chips, and a candy bar. And it is just the most impressive thing you will see in terms of using cameras and sensors in a retail setting. So cameras and sensors in a retail setting are going to be very, very powerful, very popular for retail edge use cases in terms of looking at loss prevention. Also in a warehouse, they can look at it in a warehouse on loss prevention as well. What is the breakage of something? You know, if something is too high up for something to pick, for a human to pick or for a robot to pick, is something dropping and breaking at a more frequent rate? So it's about delivering these good and solid business outcomes from the edge. And I mentioned the telemedicine one. So those are some of the big examples. And when you download the report, you'll see that in the report, we have big spreads on each of these vertical industries and the key takeaways from them. What we're doing for our 2023 report is that we're writing sample use cases for each of the vertical markets that we're surveying as well. For our 2023 report, we added transportation as the 7th vertical market. So we're writing those use cases about what the problem was, what the business problem was, and then how it was resolved, and what the business outcome was, and why that was so important. Thank you.